So it does allow you, both the property manager and owner, to interact with each other so that the property manager can invite the owner, just like what you're describing. If, let's say, you were a turnkey provider, you can invite that owner on that platform. As really, it's an option, it's not a requirement, but it would give a direct way to transfer funds into the operating account. And then the property manager can interact directly with the tenants on there as well.
Welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. My name is Axel Meyerhöfer. I'm the founder of Ideal Wealth Grower. And today we have another awesome guest. And this is a special guest because Daniel is one of the first few representatives of companies who are actually sponsoring our show. So I want to say a special thank you for that, Daniel, for doing that and for being a guest today. So without further ado, Daniel, welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. Maybe you introduce yourself real quick a little bit on what you're all about and what we're talking about with Foliolens today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Axel. Really happy to be on the show. And thank you for the partnership and allowing me to sponsor the show for a bit. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. I am the CEO and co-founder of Foliolens. I'm also a real estate investor and have been doing so for about 6 years. Mm-hmm. I'm also in the tech industry and have been doing that since I've known since I started my career. But real estate investing really took off for me. I have about 33 units today. Most of those are out of state. It's a mix of turnkey. I've also done some crowdfunding deals in the past. And over time, that really switched to kind of my firsthand direct investing in Minnesota. So I've got a little bit of a different strategy these days. But yeah, I love it. And Foliolens was really created out of necessity and my own pain points and kind of a gap in the market that myself and my co-founder wanted to address. And so we're about a year into the process and we're launching in just a couple months. I'm not sure the exact timing of when this airs, but that'll be coming pretty soon, if not already. And like I said, really excited to be on the show. And I've listened to a few episodes, so I really enjoy it so far. Yeah,
absolutely. And thanks for doing that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure by the time our audience is going to hear this, it's not very far from the launch or might be imminent. And if it comes out a little bit before the launch, I think you said the launch is like end of February into like March timeframe, right?
That's right. Yeah, we'll start bringing on some early beta testers ahead of that. But yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so maybe just at the beginning here, right off the bat, in case somebody wants to surf around while listening to us, can you say exactly what the spelling of the URL is that people would need to go to?
Yes, it's FOLIOLENS.com, foliolens.com. And yeah, if you go to the website, you can sign up for the beta program for free. We'll be in touch. I actually engage with pretty much everyone who's signing up firsthand. And yeah, we want to make sure that it's tailored to our early adopters. We consider them VIPs. We're looking out for what are the top features requested. And we have an idea. Like I said, we were solving our own problem in time management and try to make the whole experience a lot more seamless, both for the owners, landlords, but also the tenants. And yeah, excited to get that going. I think it's going to really help a lot of landlords make some progress and, like I said, save time and money ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing that people that listen to our show on a regular basis know is that the strategy that we are actually suggesting for anybody who is following the Ideal Wealth Grower path to early retirement and reaching the time freedom point is to use residential real estate investments. And especially as prices have increased so crazy in the last couple of years, I think the turnkey model out of state is more and more attractive because we're living in the San Diego area or LA area, or for that matter, pretty much anywhere within 40, 50, 60 miles of the coast, all around the country. It is very hard to get any properties that perform well. So this out of state turnkey approach, I think, becomes more and more viable. And you said earlier that you had done this, you have about 30 properties or so, and you realize that there are pain points that Foliolens is aiming to address. Can you point out a few of those pain points that you found and how you actually try to overcome them?
Yeah, so one of the main ones was really around documentation. I was getting buried in documents from, for example, earlier this year, I was refinancing, I want to say 6 or 7 properties simultaneously, trying to take advantage of just the competitive rates, the process for that, and just trying to make sure that you have everything organized very well, but also as you're receiving mountains of documents while you're still running your business was a challenge. So my office was buried in paperwork. And that was like a starting point for kind of thinking about some of these problems that we deal with. With our app, and the software, we scan documents, both if they're like hard copies or if they're kind of digitally brought into the system. And the idea is we can start kind of harnessing the data within that so we can auto-populate a lot of things that would normally require manual efforts, whether you're building your own graphs in Excel and kind of updating things monthly or quarterly. We try to take all those pieces away. So over time, you're going to see more and more of like this automation built into the platform. And so that's a big focus for us. Like, I want to find ways to save time, because for me, that's the biggest constraint. I found that when I reach, even before 30 units, I was running out of time. I just have too many things going on as an entrepreneur, having a W-2 job. That's pretty demanding. And then a family, and just trying to have hobbies in a life, right? It was just impossible to do all those things. So I really wanted to make the whole process a lot more enjoyable, take kind of the laborious or tedious tasks out of the process. But building on that, there's a lot of other integrations and things that we were exploring, things that will be available day one and others that will kind of follow right afterwards, where we're trying to enable, like, I'm an out-of-state investor for the reasons you mentioned earlier. Right. I'm in San Diego. And at the time when I was entering the market, I didn't have the capital to buy a property here and wait for cash flow years and years down the road. I wanted to bring that forward. So, I tried a couple strategies on my own. I had heard some kind of negative things about Turnkey, didn't have like the best, name for a while. But I did get connected with a great operator. And after kind of struggling on my own for a bit, I almost kind of changed directions and went away from real estate investing. But I decided to kind of take action, take that first step. And I bought my first property. That was a lower cost, kind of entry-level turnkey property. Right. Turned out really well. And I ended up buying, I want to say 9 more properties through that provider across a couple of different markets. And no regrets. Very happy with how that turned out. I think the provider you work with is pretty key there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our experience too. And I always say, I only refer my mentoring clients or anybody who comes to me and says, hey, I read about this turnkey stuff that you wrote about in an article or on Medium or in Bigger Pockets, or, we talk about it in the podcast. And I always say, well, I only refer you with good confidence to the people I work with myself, partially because I think that's a credibility issue, but partially also because then I have at least some assurance. I mean, yes, every organization evolves a little bit. And just as an example, when I bought my last package of properties in the Midwest, the clause in the contract, when it said, okay, what do we do if the appraisal comes in below the asking price? And the clause said, well, if it's within 3% of asking, then both sides agree that that is acceptable to cover out of pocket. And that was basically on $100,000, $120,000 or even $80,000 properties at the time. That was like $2,000 to $3,000 worst case, right? And now I've seen it's increased to 5%, then 8%, then 10% because, they go more and more into areas that are just up and coming because nobody initially wanted to touch them until you run out of places to renovate. And so you have to go into these lesser growing and evolving areas yet. And it's nice if you're early in that, but on the other hand, you're also taking a higher risk on the appraisal, right? So that's a thing where at least knowing who they are, who the players are, how they operate, what their mindset is, I think is an important aspect to consider. Now, there are a couple of things that I think just really recently with recent new laws and new initiatives and stuff that have been coming out, I wanted to ask you, you may remember there was a discussion for a while in the context of these 2 major initiatives from the Biden administration, the infrastructure bill and then this Build Better plan, where the discussion was, okay, should we mandate for banks and anybody who makes any financial transactions that involve a bank account to report that to the IRS? And therefore strengthening the adherence to the existing tax laws so that the IRS basically knows without ever having to come to you how much money went in and out of your bank account. And I think they started out with a ridiculous number, like $600 a year, which, anybody who has a job, that's like 1 month and you're already falling in. Then they said 10,000 and people pointed out, but think about it. If it's really transaction value, not just what you deposited or stuff like that. Even 10,000 would be pretty ridiculous. But the point that it triggered and why I wanted to ask you about it in the context of Foliolens is that a lot of people said we have given up a lot of privacy already through social media and through accepting cookies and stuff like that, where you don't really oftentimes have a choice. If you say, I don't want to accept the cookies, then you don't get access to what you want to do, right? Even though that is supposed to be a choice, but if the choice is what you want can only be allowed when you accept our terms, then I wouldn't necessarily call that a choice. But what I'm getting at, I think it's very important, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about it. You said your system, Foliolens, will also allow somebody to say, I still want the paper statements for, let's say, my mortgage statement or my insurance statement. And then I can scan that, and the OCR can actually populate certain forms to associate my properties and my mortgage statements and property taxes and whatever may come in the mail with my Foliolens account. And I'm assuming there's potentially also an option to do this kind of as a draw, automatically connecting to the existing online accounts. But there's, I think now with these, I don't know if they're actually going to pass or not, or have passed or not, but just the notion of becoming more and more transparent, I'm really curious, not so much from is your system secure or not, I think we can assume it is, but what do you see and how do you assure people, because we really have a lot of relationships here, right? Like you have property management, you have the owner, investor, you could call it landlord, you have the tenants. So there are a lot of transactional relationships happening. And in the context of this transparency drive that the government triggered, I don't know if they were aware of what they're doing, but they triggered it. And now, I mean, having this option, which we all want easier life, but is there a risk that people might say, but how much more am I giving up? And is it better to do it with paper or is it better to do it online?
Yeah, no, that's a great topic. I love it. My co-founder is head of data privacy. I don't know that you knew that, but for another firm in the past. So, and that's just his background is all security and really ensuring kind of not only compliance and technical security, but making sure that we're transparent. So I think, from a founder standpoint, it shows up in a lot of conversations I have with him. I think when you look at these different companies, it is the world we live in. Your data ends up becoming a product for a lot of firms. For me, culturally, as the CEO, it's important to make sure that it's ingrained in the employee, the company culture, that anything we're doing, of course, like data gets used in different ways, but it's not to sell it for just marketing purposes. That, if there's a product we can offer, it's within the platform, it's for the user. I know that if we don't build something that's just great for the user and they're not the product, I think you've probably seen like the Netflix documentary on some of these social media platforms where they talk about, if you're not paying for it, you are the products. And we are charging for the subscription, at least for the core ones with landlord and property manager. We offer some pieces for free, but not to the point where we can't afford to operate without kind of using the data in those other ways. But yeah, you want to know who you're working with. And that comes down to like the ownership, the culture, the track record of the founders, the company. I can tell you that my intent is to always be transparent about like the choices, but not in a way where it's like present a choice that you really can't decline, right? I know you were saying before, that's, I'm a user of these platforms too. It's not something that I'm a fan of in the way they connect business. So I don't know, that's what I can say about that. And like I said, my co-founder is head of data privacy and comes with those values as well. So I think that helps kind of guide the company in the long term for those reasons.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you for starting a little bit into that area. Now, one thing that I know that I've been asked by a lot of our mentoring clients is it's pretty obvious and clear, if I have, let's say, one mortgage with one property and with Chase Bank, another one with Wells Fargo, another one with Bank of America, or any of the other names, it's not advertising for any bank here. Then you typically have a statement, whether it's digital PDF or paper statement for that particular property associated with that account. When you, on the other hand, look at, like, for example, I have an operating business that runs, and you probably have that too, besides Foliolens, where all the transactions for the properties, the payments from property management, the outgoing payments for escrow and so forth happening. What a lot of my mentoring clients have asked is if we were to sign up to software solutions like Foliolens, or there's others that are more on the personal finance side like Mint or so forth, then the question becomes, how does the software figure out what in my statement or my transactions on the bank are actually related to my properties and what is other stuff? Or am I in the moment where I say, okay, I connect the bank account, basically connecting to everything that's happening there?
Yeah, that's a good question. For Foliolens, we're not tapping into the bank accounts directly. I think that's a functionality or integration that we will support in the future. Right now we do connect it, but not for like importing the data. It's, we're connecting it so that you can transact with your tenants and you can, like your operating account, like you described. But in terms of the data within that, yeah, I could see some concerns for it. But I think, you have a dedicated business account in terms of like the logic and the systems that are looking at that data. Each company has their own. Our focus is more on the document side to actually learn and kind of understand. We want to be the best at recognizing real estate documents and not outside of that. So we want to know this is a tax statement, this is a insurance premium or a declaration date, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it wasn't so much a matter of concern. I think it's more curiosity, right? Because you have ingoing and outgoing payments that may not necessarily, like right now we have a situation with one of our banks where every transaction we make from the reserves to the operating account, so that when there's a maintenance issue and so forth, we can pay property management that way, or at least replenish the reserves. And the bank uses some kind of, I would assume, data management place to track these transactions. So they show up in the statement, but there is no other information than the name of this data center, right? So that is more literally a curiosity without trying to learn how to do this. But if I imagine, I had that statement, has 27 entries in 1 month that all say the same thing for all kinds of different things, no more explanation. That would seem to me pretty tricky to figure something out. But let's leave that for a moment. What I think our audience would also be interested in, when I looked at the website this morning, it said, okay, we addressing landlords, we addressing property management, we are addressing tenants. Can you describe a little bit more, so if I'm an investor sitting in San Diego and working with a bunch of turnkey providers, my role, and that's what I want, right? The passive component in it is, yes, I want to make sure that I get notified if there's anything going on with the properties. But other than that, I just really want once a month for all my properties under one turnkey to get the payment and the report, and then have the system, or in this case, the system is my wife, as the system paying the different mortgages to the different mortgage companies through the bank account. And that's about it, right? And I'm naturally always working on increasing and growing the portfolio, but for the existing, so there are different roles, right? Like, so the PMs, for example, they need to be in touch with the tenants, then they collect money. Would they have a role in Foliolens? Then me as the investor, can you go a little bit into that and describe how the different potential users can benefit?
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Because I do have a mixture of where I've outsourced property management, but also have to do the landlording directly. That was one of the inspirations for how we created the roles within the software. So it does allow you, both the property manager and owner, to interact with each other so that the property manager can invite the owner, just like what you're describing. If, let's say, you were a turnkey provider, you can invite that owner on that platform. As really, it's an option, it's not a requirement, but it would give a direct way to transfer funds into the operating account. And then the property manager can interact directly with the tenants on there as well. So the other things, like say an owner, we call investor on the platform as well, is they could sign up without being invited by a property manager. And we wanted to kind of provide that functionality so that you could speak to the performance of your property. I find that a lot of investors struggle to describe how their property is performing. That's an objective for us to be the best in that area as well. There's just not a whole lot of tools available, or I think that are strong in that way, where you can manage your portfolio. So it's more the portfolio management aspects of it.
Yeah, so you're going to end the reign of Excel spreadsheets and finally make it so that I can, with one click, say, this is actually the cash flow for last month or last quarter or last year, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we'd be able to look at like the net cash flow. Some of the other functionality would be like the document imaging, that you're able to automatically organize those things. I'm very meticulous in how I organize my documents, how I file them. I want to be able to very quickly gather the right documents and be able to pursue another deal, for example. I'm always pretty good at that. And I wanted to, like, it takes a lot of time though. And I wanted to provide that functionality to other people. You have, let's say you're doing a bunch of refinances. You don't have to manually try to scrape through everything and pull it back down, but it's very well organized for the property. That's another area. And then
before you name another one, I want to just reiterate that point real quick, because one of the big things that Ideal Wealth Grower is trying to help people with, and I mentioned the mentoring earlier, and that is, we want you, as anybody in the audience, to constantly have the mindset that I'm creating a growing portfolio of assets to reach this time freedom point, right? This number somewhere in the future on my calendar where, like Daniel, you might say my number is 8,000 a month, Axel's number maybe 10,000 a month, Johnny's number maybe 5,000 a month. So the number is different, but the performing assets that it takes to get to that number can be calculated, right? And so typically that means I start with my first, or like you said, you bought a first one and then you bought a package of another 9 and kept going. And the same is true for me. And I can say a lot of our clients, the same is true. And every single time, I think this is really, I hope I'm getting this right. And please tell me if I'm saying it wrong or describing it wrong. But to me, it sounds like the process of saying, I am at this point where I have 5 properties and I'm getting ready to buy number 6, or I have a chance to buy 3 more, whatever the circumstance may be. Every single time anybody who's ever been there, even with the first one, has to provide this mountain of evidence, basically, of paperwork and documents. And I just literally am like days away from closing on a refi where I bought a property for cash and now want to put a mortgage on it. And all the mortgage statements and everything, every insurance document and stuff for all my existing properties are required. And it would be, I have done something on my own. I'm not an IT expert like you are, but as much as I could. But the pain is every month I have to do everything that comes in on statements and stuff and put it into this folder that I created and developed, so that when next time I want to add another property to the portfolio and they say, send me everything, then I don't have to go to the scanner and scan everything in manually. So that would be such a help. And I want to point this out to people. We are on the journey and on the path to develop this portfolio, which is an iterative process. And every single time we add something or change something, the people that actually give us the majority of the money say, give me everything. Like, I joke around that they want everything other than blood samples, right? So that, I think, is a really, did I say this right, Daniel? Is that kind of one of the things that you will help us with in the future, not to have to go through this pain every single time?
Yeah, that's absolutely a big part of it. There's other times besides kind of applying for financing where you're going to need documents. It could be because you're being asked by, say, your tax accountant for certain documents to set up, your business account for the first time, or what was the purchase agreement? Give me the closing disclosure. There's different requests you'll get, and you'll be ready for those things. And it's just, I think it's good practice to have everything very dialed in. This is a business. If people let it go on autopilot, let's say it's your insurance premium, the renewal comes in. Sometimes, especially when you have multiple properties, you could let that go. You could just automatically renew. You don't do anything with it. I found that I let it go for a couple of years in some circumstances. And when I went back to review, I found that even though the dollar amount per property wasn't much, especially being out of state, and these are, lower policies, but as a percentage, they were very high, like 20% year over year, 25%. And I didn't catch that. So it wasn't until I said, okay, let me pause and start building like the reports and see what things look like over the last, 5 years. I could see some properties, my premiums didn't make sense. They're in the same zip codes or very nearby. And I had, rates all over the place. That was an actionable piece of data that I could go and then bring down my costs. And those are things that we'll just do within the platform, where we take in some of these statements and we do that analysis for you, and that'll get stronger over time. But yeah, we want to make sure that that's working for you, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely very powerful. And I feel really strongly in experience over the last 10 years of having been involved in this, that you basically reach milestones, right? Like, I think the very, very earliest first milestone is to say, okay, I've heard so much about this real estate stuff. I want to at least make an informed decision if this is something for me. I think that's an important one. And then the next one, not very far removed, is to say, okay, now that I have a little more, I'm working with somebody like, we are always looking to mentor people because we know that it's pretty complex. The second milestone is to actually get to the first property that you then really own, that you bought as an investor, no longer just for personal occupancy. And then further milestones are not that obvious. I call one, for example, I don't want to go into it because this is mainly for you and for Foliolens, but one important one that I found is when you get around 5 properties. And I mean properties, I don't mean just doors. And the reason I'm saying this is when you really look at it and you follow good practices when it comes to building reserves for CapEx, for maintenance, and for vacancy, and you follow basically, I wouldn't say the rules, but what people recommend between 3 and 5% of your rent. If you really do this consistently and you say, I buy 1 or 2 properties a year and I get to property number 5, and you have done it and been disciplined, you got to a number in your reserves where it just makes no sense anymore to continue to do the same thing, both with the properties you already have, as well as any future properties you get. So that's another milestone and so forth. And another one in that context that you just touched on is when your portfolio reaches a point where it makes sense to have basically more of like an umbrella approach to insurance, right? Not just for the deductible amount, where I always say I want the highest possible one in deductibles, right? Because I want to keep the policy cost low, but it's also becoming attractive when you can say, okay, I have 9 properties in my portfolio. I want you to give me a quote for all of them together, even though each property is individually insured, but you're a different client than somebody who just have a house next door and want to get a homeowners insurance or something like that, right? So those milestones, I think, are important. Now, one thing that I'm pretty sure people would ask is, if we as investors work with our property management, which like might be a bunch of properties here and another bunch of properties in a different location under different management, do they then have to have Foliolens in their inventory, or what happens if they use AppFolio or Buildium or anything like that?
Yeah, you could operate separately. Of course, there are some, I guess, advantages to having them both on there. That'll make communication easier. I do that right now. I have multiple property management systems that I'm a client of because I have my property managers, at least for now. Some of those will switch over to Foliolens, but
yeah, get them all to switch then.
Yeah, that's definitely the idea. Our focus is really like around the small and medium-sized portfolios. So some of the property managers who may have thousands of units under management, it's just not our focus right now. So there's definitely a reason to use AppFolio and some others for right now. And yeah, I would definitely say you could use both, and there's value in both of those, but some advantages to bringing them together when you can.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So before we get to our quick fire round, so to speak, I want to give you one more opportunity. What are things that you would like to tell people to do next, now that they know Foliolens exists and what it does and which kind of groups it addresses? What would be the next step that you would recommend for people to do?
Yeah, sign up for the beta. Go to the website. It's very seamless. There's just a couple pieces of basic information. We're not going to spam you with a bunch of emails. It's pretty infrequent. Like I said, I value everyone's time. So we'll be very careful about that, but we'd love to have you connected with our community. We take it very seriously in terms of people being an early adopter and joining the platform with us. So we do treat people like VIPs and pay attention to their requirements. It could be 1 unit or it could be, 200 units. So in either case, we'd be excited to have you. I'd also say follow us on Instagram at Foliolens, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. Our team is very engaged on all platforms, and if you send us any messages, we're going to respond, specifically to your feedback or question, and we'll walk you through it and see if it's the right fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for describing that, Daniel. And for our audience, I want to reiterate, Daniel told me that they are also willing to listen to ideas and input, not claiming that Foliolens is perfect from the first day. And I think that's important. And we don't often get the opportunity to say, hey, this is one of the areas I'm struggling with. Have you thought about that? And if not, can you maybe do something about it? So I really want to thank you for being open to that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so then as people that listen to the show regularly, there's always 1 or 2 questions that I ask everybody. And the first one for you, Daniel, I want to ask is there any particular person out there that you admire that you would like to meet? And if so, who is it and why?
I'd have to say Elon Musk. I can't think of another entrepreneur who's more bold. And, I know he's controversial, but very interesting. I'm a big fan. SpaceX, Tesla, all the above. But yeah, I think just, he's changing the way we live. And, as a personality, it could be frustrating to some people, but I think it's, a lot of really cool advances in like society and technology. So for me, I would say Elon Musk. I'd love
I would come with you if we can pull that
yeah.
off. Let's just for a second assume that were possible. Anything specific that you would want to talk to him about or ask him about?
Ooh, I would kind of bring it into the prop tech space and just brainstorm on it with him on, other opportunities to kind of disrupt the industry. For me right now, that's property management. I think it's well overdue for being disrupted. It's pretty much been frozen in time for many, many years. I think, it's ripe to change. And there's a lot of things going on in the prop tech space. So that's interesting. But, Elon Musk is just, whenever you think you're thinking big enough, Elon will think even bigger, right? He's talking about occupying Mars and all kinds of different things that I think are interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing, if I may say so, even though these are questions for you, but the one thing I have to say is I'm very impressed by the fact when you leave all the noise and all the stuff that people point out on Twitter and so forth, a little bit aside and step back, what really impresses me is that this guy who is such an amazing engineer and technologist is really, really well versed as a philosopher, basically, or at least very well aware of philosophy and what the really brilliant philosophers, if I could get the word out, have actually written and said and so forth. And I think that has massively informed his willingness and ability to look at the big picture and look at where humanity is going and what are the things needed in the future, rather than problem solving, which I'm sad to say, I believe is kind of like the thing that we have done the last 100 years, is people getting more and more pigeonholed into identify everything as a nail, meaning a problem, and be the hammer that drives it home, and forget about what you're nailing it into. So that I think is really a fascinating thing for somebody who is being labeled all kinds of things, but I don't think many people have labeled him a philosopher.
I can completely see how it's guided some of his bigger ideas. I love what inspires me about him as a quality is like just the lateral thinking. And like, I try to bring that into what we're doing at Foliolens, not just trying to solve an obvious problem, even if it hasn't been solved already, but trying to rethink of like how we can do things differently. And the challenge with that, and like I think Elon could attest to more than anyone, is that most people will say it's not possible, or you won't get a lot of support on it. And he's been taking bold steps and bold moves, and I take a lot of inspiration from that.
Yeah, one thing that both for the audience and for you, like a little side service here, is I have recently found it really interesting to listen to a guy that is coming from your area, from the agile software development area, by the name of Joe Justice, who actually worked for Microsoft and Amazon and also spent a couple of years as the agile king, I guess they would call it at Tesla. But mainly when he is interviewing, there's a bunch of really interesting interviews on YouTube, very recent, from conferences and podcasts and stuff. And the reason I point that out is because from an insider in a technology specialty, to hear how does all this kind of stuff that people talk about show up in real life for real people in a normal work week. And I thought that is really fascinating, because we can talk about first principles and going to Mars and multiplanetary humanity and all that kind of stuff, but those are like these huge, big concepts. And for anybody who says, well, is there actually something happening on the ground for a normal person who works in a company? I think these interviews from Joe Justice, who's literally been in there, really fascinating. Okay, so last question for today is, if you had a time machine, Daniel, you could go forward, backward, anywhere you wanted to, where would you go and why?
I would go back to probably about 2009 for different reasons. It was just a good time financially, I think, to invest, maybe even before that. But I would, I think I made a mistake early on that I would correct, and that was focusing too much on information and not experience. And it could have been in a number of categories, but I would have just taken more action earlier, because information without the experience or the knowledge and just firsthand, it allows like fear to kind of fester and prevent you from doing things. Like, you know what needs to happen, but because you haven't seen it, you don't do it. And I would just, I would go back and I would get out of the house more, talk to other investors, go to meetups. I lived in areas back then that would have been really advantageous to do, very low cost investing. I'm sure other people can relate to, like, man, I wish I knew I had this real estate strategy back then. But the reality is there's always a strategy in front of you. You just have to be, now is the best time to kind of take that action. So for me, yeah, it would just be taking more action earlier, because of course I could capitalize on all kinds of different market changes specifically back then. But I know that if I was just a little bit, I was thinking about things a little differently, I'd just be farther along. But
yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's what I've heard a lot of times. I mean, we have been doing shows and interviews now for quite a while, and I've been a guest on many, and that is actually a recurring theme. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And the point that I find, is not just in general to say I go to a space for the reasons that you just mentioned, but also to say, okay, if I take one slice of something that I am now understanding, right, where I always say, okay, there's 3 steps, right? You have information and data. When you combine that with experience, you get knowledge. And when you take knowledge and apply more experience, you get wisdom, right? And so if you could take today's wisdom and apply it earlier, what most people acknowledge in the same context is that doesn't mean to a million different things, but to something where you can really say, I have a thorough understanding. And because of that, it's a matter of how soon can I start? And I wish I would have started 20 years earlier or something like that, right? But it's not, I want to start 20 different things. It's one thing and stay focused on that, and then really pursue it with all the opportunities as they come along. So that's really awesome. And thank you for sharing that. So that brings us to the end of the show. Foliolens.com, I think we said it a bunch of times. And I want to thank you again, Daniel, for coming on the show and for being a supporter of the show. So any last words for our audience?
I love the show. Along the lines of that last question, I would say, if you find yourself just reading books and listening and you're not out there for more than like 3 months, it's time to pause, get out there, take some action. It can be as simple as like pick up the phone. And if anyone wants to if you're local to San Diego to meet up, feel free to reach out to me. I'm all for that. Just looking forward to kind of helping as many landlords and property managers as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I'm saying. My motto has always been helping others help themselves become successful, and you do the same. So let's do it together.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Axel.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.